There are over 1,000 MMORPGs featured on MMORPG.com's game list. As a new player to the genre, how are you supposed to decide which one is best for you? MMOs, more than any other genre, can oftentimes be a massive time sink. Depending on the game, when you first create your character, you could be potentially hundreds of hours of progression away from actually participating in endgame content. This makes choosing the correct MMO quite a daunting task, because it would be awful to sink 20 hours into a certain game only to realize, hey, this isn't for me. Now, as someone who's tried a massive amount of MMOs in the past year, mostly as a brand new player, I understand how difficult it can be to choose the right one. Especially if you're new to the genre and you don't understand some of the key things to look for and what that might mean for you and your playtime. So today, I've compiled a list of 5 MMOs that really drive a good new player experience, whether you're new to the genre or even just returning to the genre after a long period. Trust me, MMOs still operate on the same core foundations and systems that they always have, but they've also changed quite a bit. There's a lot more passes and tokens and things of that nature. After this video, you should be able to hone in on a game that meets your playstyle, or at least gives you a better idea of what you should be looking for. Now, before we get into that, I would just like to remind everyone that channel memberships are indeed active. If you've been enjoying my content, this is a cheap and easy way to support me. If that's not your cup of tea, a comment, a like, a sub, those things always help. And if you're looking to talk to other like-minded MMO fans, feel free to join our community Discord, linked at the top of the description. Now, let's get into it. So before we jump into some of these games, I want to actually tell you guys how I came up with this list. Basically, I thought of a few different categories or a few different things that are most important for people who are new to the genre. These categories I found by sifting through Reddit threads, YouTube videos, even Twitter posts. So number 1, we have the new player experience or onboarding. This contains everything from character creation to the tutorial to how well the game explains its systems before letting you run off into the world. This also includes ease of access. Is the game cross-platform? Does the game exist on mobile? How easy is it to actually get into the game? You see, most new players will actually decide in the first hour of gameplay if the game is one that's actually worth their time. These first few moments within a game are integral. Number 2, we have time. It seems that many new MMO players are well aware of the time sinks that could be required before they start to actually, quote-unquote, have fun. This is a bit of a misconception that new players have, simply because, for me, I personally prefer games that also have a fun leveling experience. If the game only starts to be fun when you've already invested hundreds of hours, that's an objective failure, in my opinion. However, here, I think we can talk about the respect of time. These days, it can be tough to find many hours every week, let alone every day, to hop on a game. So you want the time that you do invest into the game to matter, and to always matter. So for that reason, this category is more, how much does the game respect the player's time invested? For number 3, we have the fun factor. Piggybacking off what we saw in point number 2, how fun is it to actually play the game? Now, fun can be a difficult metric to quantify, but we can take a look at a few factors, such as gameplay, skill expression, difficulty. Sometimes, especially for new players, a game can seem overly complex and overly difficult, which is definitely not fun, especially if you're new to the system. We can also take a look at things like community and community-driven events within a game, where you're not actually progressing or doing something productive for your character, you're more just existing in a shared online space to have fun. Number 4, and finally, monetization. Despite being what some might call a dying genre, though I'm hesitant to agree, us in the MMO community sure make quite a loud fuss about monetization. You might be familiar with terms like pay to win or whale. The reason I think MMO players make a louder fuss than other genres about these systems is because of that time investment I mentioned earlier.
Where'd you get that armor?
Oh, this. Yeah, no, I just bought it. Apparently it's part of the new season cosmetics.
Where you just spent like real money on that, like actual dollars?
Yeah.
Often, one of the biggest markers of a character's success within an MMO is simply just time put into the game. Someone with 1,000 hours should, on paper, have a much better and more complete character than someone with 100 hours. However, some of these monetization systems I mentioned, which appear in certain games, can sort of undo this balance. A player with 100 hours who has spent $1,000 can sometimes appear just as strong or cool as the player with 1,000 hours who has spent $0. So, just to recap, new player experience and onboarding, respect of time, the fun factor, and monetization are the 4 categories we're going to be judging these games on. With those in mind, and without further ado, these are my top 5 games for MMO beginners in the year 2024. Bear in mind, these have no apparent order, but we are going to be giving them a general ranking score at the end of every game. So first up on this list has to be Elder Scrolls Online, a story-driven action combat MMO that was originally released in 2014 by ZeniMax Studios, being cross-platform for both consoles and PC, meaning it's widely accessible. The Elder Scrolls is an extremely familiar IP to most gamers, and ESO, while it has many differences from the single-player RPG series, the UI and many other aspects of the game world and systems will be very familiar to someone who has played Skyrim or Morrowind. The new player experience is extremely welcoming as you're given a wide array of classes and character options. And you're also given a wide amount of options of where you would like to start the game. The entire world is completely scaled, so you'll never be outleveled by any specific zone. So for a new player to the genre, this could be a little bit less of an intimidating experience compared to other competing MMOs. In terms of new player experience and onboarding, I'll give ESO a 7 out of 10. It would be an 8 out of 10, however, the game is actually buy to play, meaning you're going to have to spend money in order to actually try the game. It's often pretty cheap, around $20 US, but still, that's going to add a bit of weight and friction for new players looking to just try it out. In terms of respecting your time, ESO features a huge horizontal progression system that focuses on map exploration and completion, as well as many collection systems that are baked into it. You could hop on for half an hour and make a small but meaningful amount of progress in regards to this sort of completionism content that will basically be relevant for as long as the game exists. However, there is a bit of a con in this regard. ESO definitely prompts its players to log in daily in a few different ways. One of those ways is by training your mount speed. You can essentially make your mount faster, allow it to carry more, and allow it to run for longer by logging in every day and training 1 point per day. This is a time-gated system that at its base form takes 180 days to actually complete. Also, once you get into crafting and wanting to accumulate gold, you might feel pressured to log in and do daily writs. And on top of that, you're going to want to do a plethora of other daily things like your undaunted tasks, PvP, etc. But at the end of the day, those are all rather optional and you can really play the game however you like. In terms of respecting your time, I'll give ESO a 6 out of 10. Next, the fun factor. For me personally, I have an absolute blast exploring the world of Tamriel in ESO. The open world, the stories, the lore, it seems like a true living, breathing world with a ridiculous amount of voice-acted NPCs which each have their own story and reason to exist within the world. Not to mention, I absolutely love completionism content and even managed to get the Master Angler title by catching literally every fish in the game. While some people might consider that a boring grind, which is fair, for me it's an awesome achievement that had me explore every corner of the map. ESO also features dungeons, trials, or raids, mass open-world PvP, or more intimate battlegrounds. ESO features its very own card game, 8 unique crafting professions of which you can participate in every single one, an amazing player-owned housing system that you can spend hours upon hours decorating and getting to look just right. Basically, you never really run out of things to do in ESO. There's a ridiculous amount of content. The only con I would have to say in this situation is that the open world PvE content is widely considered to be far too easy, due to things like power creep, and just an overall scaling of the world that is very easily accomplished with any max level character. This sort of lack of challenge in the open world can be a bit monotonous and boring to some. But in terms of the fun factor, I'm gonna again give ESO an 8 out of 10. And finally, monetization. Unfortunately for ESO, this is probably one of the more negative aspects of the game. First off, the game is buy to play. Secondly, the game features an in-game shop and a currency, which also features a loot box system known as crates. The shop also features certain pay-to-win elements, such as the ability to buy mount training, experience boosters, etc. The game is also chock full of DLC, and if you want the newest DLC, you'll have to purchase that for a premium. And finally, the game features an optional subscription known as ESO Plus. I say optional because ESO Plus grants you access to the crafting bag, which is pretty much essential if you plan on doing any of the professions within the game. There are hundreds upon hundreds of different resources you're going to come across from gathering or searching items as well as killing mobs, and these items will basically immediately fill your inventory. The crafting bag gives you a separate, unlimited inventory which holds all of those resources. Furthermore, ESO Plus will grant you access to all of the DLC within the game except the newest one, which you'll still need to pay that premium for. Unfortunately, if you don't have the funds to buy the game and ESO Plus, I wouldn't really recommend ESO in that regard. So in terms of monetization, ESO gets a 3 out of 10. Altogether, averaging the scoring system, that gives ESO a 6.25 out of 10 in terms of a good MMO for new players to the genre. In my opinion, if you can afford it, ESO gives some amazing, immersive, and fun gameplay that allows you to play how you want. It's available on multiple platforms and has a thriving community. But the barrier to entry can be a bit steep, and that constant monthly fee can be a bit much, especially if you don't have very much time to play. So next up, we have one that might ruffle some feathers, but classic World of Warcraft. Ultimately, the game was and still is one of the best MMORPG experiences you can find on the market. And for many, maybe even most experienced MMO players, this was their first MMO experience. I hesitate to add the modern or retail version of World of Warcraft to this list, as over the years the game has added so much content that it can be pretty overwhelming for a new player. Classic WoW though, specifically the classic era servers from Hardcore to Season of Discovery, the Murloc slaying, Barons traversing, world buff having experience that dominated the market in 2004, is actually probably my personal recommendation for new players looking to try their first MMO. There are a couple of caveats though, and a couple reasons that this might not be the experience you're looking for. So let's get into the categories. First of all, the new player experience in Classic WoW is excellent, though it's quite dependent on server population. You have all kinds of options of how you want to play. You can even hop into the new expansion that Classic WoW is currently on, which right now is Cataclysm. Though, as I mentioned, for the sake of this recommendation, I'm only going to be talking about Classic Era. Furthermore, you can choose to play on a PvP or PvE server. You can choose whether you want to be a hardcore character, which is a challenging permadeath mode that I probably wouldn't recommend to new players. But honestly, the best time to jump into Classic WoW as a new player is going to be when one of their classic servers are having a refresh. Whether that's a new hardcore server, or more recently we had the introduction to Season of Discovery, when you get on a new, fresh Classic WoW server where everyone starts on an equal playing ground and there's plenty of people to quest with or do dungeons with, it's hands down my favorite MMO experience that currently exists online. However, due to the infrequency that these new and fresh servers happen, you could potentially be waiting half a year or longer for these sort of moments. With that being said, part of the reason of WoW's massive success was that it was the first MMO to really come out that catered to the solo experience. It was probably the only MMO that existed in 2004 where it was feasible to actually get to the max level as a solo player. Not to mention that the game is very easy to access considering it was originally released 2 decades ago. You're not going to need much computing power to actually play the game. I'm going to go with an 8 out of 10 for Classic WoW's new player and onboarding experience. Though if you're lucky enough to try a fresh server with a huge population, this could easily be a 9.5. Now, does Classic WoW respect your time? Well, yes and no. The leveling process is most definitely a grind, as this game was made in an era where leveling was considered to be one of, if not the main part of the game. Leveling all the way to 60 in Classic WoW is still to this day a significant achievement, and will most likely take you, as a new player, at least a month, if you play a reasonable amount every day. With that being said, if you're the type of gamer who has very limited playing time, let's say less than 3 hours per week, it's going to take you a very long time to get to level 60. On top of that, once you actually do make it to level 60 and find yourself in the endgame, the dynamics of how you interact with the game will probably change quite a bit. For most people, you're going to want to find a guild, grind out your pre-raid best-in-slot items from some level 60 dungeons, but then eventually get into raids. Raids in Classic WoW exist on generally a weekly lockout, meaning that you and your guild are going to need to schedule a day of the week where you and your guildmates, up to 39 others, all log in and attempt this content. So this adds a level of scheduling to the game that could be difficult for some people with busy and unpredictable lives. This is probably Classic WoW's weakest point, at least when it comes to new players who might be new to the genre. So here, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 in terms of respecting your time. But is Classic WoW fun? Well, some people are going to have different opinions on this. Some people say that the questing feels a little outdated, which is fair. Oftentimes, you might find yourself having to grind certain enemies to get to the next level. Some people say that the endgame is really just waiting around for the raid, which is also fair. But what Classic WoW really does right is progression. If you're anything like me, the allure of an MMO might be the what-ifs. What if my character gets this new weapon? What if my character looked like this? What if my character finally gets that epic helmet? The nice thing in Classic WoW is from the moment you start leveling to the moment you equip your final piece of best in slot gear, you're going to notice an increase in power. The respect that this game has for the feeling of progression as you level up, learn new abilities, apply new talent points, equip new gear, still to this day has not been matched by any other game I've played. Every single upgrade you make in Classic WoW feels significant enough to constantly warrant excitement. It's genuinely exciting to gain a level because you know that everything you're doing right now is just going to become easier. Your stats go up, you might be able to equip a new piece of gear you had waiting in your inventory. You might have applied a talent point that's a total game changer, or you might have learned a new ability that completely evolves how you play your class. For me personally, that is what I find the most fun in an MMO. Meaningful progression that makes you feel stronger. So with all that being said, I'm gonna give Classic WoW a fun factor of 7 out of 10. And finally, monetization. One of the nice things about the more old school games or classic games is that they're generally not bogged down with as much pay to win or monetization strategy as some of the modern MMOs. Classic WoW does require a subscription fee to play, however with this subscription you also get access to retail WoW in case you ever wanted to try that as well. There's no level boosts, no shops, no buying gold, at least in the classic era servers. So the only thing you can really purchase are server transfers, name changes, and services like that. One thing to be aware of, however, is especially whenever a new classic era server starts, we often see a surge in real-world trading, where people are buying and selling gold using third-party websites. But in terms of the actual game's monetization, it's probably one of the fairest MMO experiences that currently exists. It's definitely a far cry better than retail WoW, where you can purchase anything and everything under the sun with real-life money. So with all that being said, I'm gonna rate Classic WoW's monetization as a very respectable 9 out of 10. All of these scores average out to a 7.25 out of 10. In my opinion, Classic WoW is the first-time MMO player experience. Like I said, I personally recommend on playing one of the classic era servers, whether that be hardcore or one of the more temporary seasons like we saw with Season of Mastery and Discovery. It really is and was the quintessential MMO experience, and it laid down the foundation for modern MMOs today. Even if you've never played an MMO, I'm sure you've heard the term WoW clone. This is because so many other games were eager to copy the success that World of Warcraft had. And honestly, most of them paled in comparison. So next up, we have a game that might actually surprise some of you. It's definitely not the most popular MMO currently. It's probably not even in the top 10. With that being said, I think it's an excellent recommendation specifically for those new to the genre. And that's going to be Star Wars: The Old Republic. Released in 2011, but still being actively updated to this day. Star Wars is a tab-target, story-focused MMO where you can really control the narrative direction of your character. Become an anti-hero, a vigilante, a stereotypical good evildoer, or vice versa. For some, this is going to be a very familiar IP, and if you're a Star Wars fan at all, this has to be your first choice. So let's get into it. The new player experience in Star Wars: The Old Republic starts off with, hands down, one of the coolest and most sleek character creation screens you can imagine. You start off by choosing a faction and furthermore choosing a story, and an archetype that fits your playstyle. Basically, there are 8 playable storylines, 4 available for each faction, whether that be the Sith Empire or the Galactic Republic. Once you choose one of your storylines, you can further narrow that down with a combat style, whether you're dual-wielding lightsabers or focusing on blasters. The cartoony graphic style, though looking a little outdated these days, is definitely charming, and with an easy-to-understand user interface and a quest guide that immediately points you in the right direction upon entering the game, overall, I have to give Star Wars an 8 out of 10 in this regard. The character customization just immediately gets you invested into your character as you decide upon a storyline and a combat style. You're already starting to think about what sort of personality you're going to form your character to have. The only sort of drawback I see here is that the game is not cross-platform and currently is only available on PC. I think Star Wars would probably drastically increase its player base by releasing on console, but unfortunately it doesn't sound like that's ever going to happen. Now, let's talk about respecting your time. It's a little hard to answer this question regarding Star Wars because one of the reasons that this game is on this list is that it functions more as an RPG sometimes than an MMORPG, which might make it a smoother transition for someone who's never really played an MMO prior. The leveling experience in Star Wars is definitely more akin to the older style of MMO, where leveling can take a decent chunk of time. It won't take quite as much effort as classic WoW, especially if you purchase the subscription, as that will increase your experience gained. But honestly, the Old Republic needs to be thought of a little differently than other MMOs. The game is most definitely not a race to endgame, and for most of the players of the game, they'll tell you to take your time and just enjoy and embrace the storytelling. Taking the time to actually think through each of your character's responses in order to form your Jedi or Sith into the actual character you want. The whole game operates on a morality system that can drastically change the outcome of your character and how they operate within the world. Or worlds. And this creates a replayability factor for the game that borderlines on infinite. Like I said, this one's a tough one to rank for Star Wars because respecting your time isn't really a question that's even asked when it comes to how most people enjoy this game. With that being said, the non-stop replayability and the overall flow of the gameplay within the game is going to give me a slightly better than middle-of-the-road ranking. Let's say 6.5 out of 10. Now, the fun factor. Star Wars The Old Republic is undoubtedly a great time. Even if you're not into the narrative direction of the game where your choices constantly have an impact on the world around you, let's say you're just into fluid movement, decent combat, PvP, etc. Star Wars has some of the best tab target fluidity, with moves like a jump attack where you fly at your opponent, even using this ability to get over obstacles or jumping directly off your mount. On top of that, you can participate in spaceship PvP, where you operate a massive spaceship and fight against others. Be warned, however, this is a fairly high skill ceiling activity, so if you suck at PvP like me, you're probably going to get destroyed for the first little while. And even furthermore, the game features Battlegrounds, Arena, multiplayer PvE content, plenty of exploration and completionism content, and honestly, it's just chock-filled with things to do. Especially if you're a Star Wars fan, I don't see someone getting bored while exploring this game. It's really the whole package. So for that reason, the fun factor of Star Wars gets a stunning 9 out of 10. However, things can't stay good forever. Monetization, unfortunately, is going to be Star Wars The Old Republic's worst category. It's probably not the worst on the list, but the monetization in Star Wars isn't great. The game features constant reminders and advertisements of things that you can purchase with cartel coins, which is their obfuscation currency that distracts you from the fact you're spending real money. On top of that, there's a subscription which is a bit complicated in how it actually works. Basically, as a free-to-play player, you'll only have access to about level 60. Where level 80 is the actual highest level. Once you purchase the subscription, at least one time, you do gain access to a lot of things permanently, even if you unsubscribe. You can probably get away with free-to-play for a good 100 to even 200 hours of gameplay, which is pretty awesome. But some of the restrictions that do come when you're not currently paying for an active subscription includes a cap on credits, which is money within the game. The inability to do 8-man operations, you have to authorize every artifact, and the galactic subscriber rewards you don't get access to, and they're pretty beneficial. But I found personally that the way the game monetizes is rather confusing and hard to figure out. There's so many different ways to pay for or acquire things in game, and it feels like the confusion is almost intentional. Like, there's technically 3 types of accounts. There's free to play, and then there's preferred, which is someone who has at least purchased the subscription for 1 month, and then obviously there's the active subscriber. Like I said, it's not the worst monetization on this list, but unfortunately for those reasons, the monetization score of Star Wars is going to be a 4 out of 10. Simply because even though I've put 100 hours into the game, I still don't truly understand how all the monetization works. And some of the restrictions for not being an active subscriber are really annoying, like the cap on how much money you can have. Which means that overall, we come to a score of 6.9. Nice. 6.9 out of 10. And I think that's quite reasonable. Star Wars The Old Republic behaves often like a single-player RPG. A really awesome and great single-player RPG that's well voice-acted and narrated excellently with some amazing replayability. With a little less focus on the MMO part that makes up an MMORPG, I think this game could be a really smooth transition for people who are new to the genre. Anyway, next up, we have Guild Wars 2, the hybrid combat horizontal progression god of MMORPGs. Released in 2012 after the wide-ranged commercial success of the original Guild Wars, this sequel is actually quite a bit different from the original game, but remains as one of the most popular MMOs out currently, and for good reason. Now, the new player experience for Guild Wars 2 has some absolutely amazing things going for it, but also some things that are not so amazing. Let's start with the not so amazing because it's rather anecdotal. Basically, after creating your character in Guild Wars 2, you might find the game to feel rather bland. This is something that happened to me when I originally tried the game years ago, and something that is echoed across conversation boards online. People say, I tried Guild Wars 2 for an hour, but just couldn't really get into it. I'm not really sure why people feel this way or even why I did. It might be the fact that Guild Wars plays a little differently than most MMOs. It doesn't really have quests in the same sense, and the game starts you off by doing some seemingly arbitrary tasks in your starting area. I don't really have an answer as to why some people feel bored for the first hour in Guild Wars 2, but let me just say, stick the game out for more than an hour, and I guarantee you'll change your opinion as you start to understand the gameplay loop a little bit more. Now, the amazing part of the new player experience is the fact that there is absolutely no content within the game that ever becomes irrelevant. Sort of similar to ESO in this regard, map completion is a goal for most players on most of their characters. On top of that, there are dynamic events and even world events that are probably taking place in your character's starting zone. Depending on what race you choose from, these events are still done to this day by max level players with thousands of hours in the game. What this does is creates a lively world where no matter where you might be in the game, you're probably going to have other players around you. And this is so important for immersion and getting new players to stick to the game. So because of that and the unfortunately, I guess, boring first hour of gameplay that some people struggle with, I'm going to give Guild Wars 2 a 7 out of 10 in terms of the new player experience. But if you stick out that first hour and start understanding what you're working towards and what you need to be doing, it could easily be a 9 or even a 10, because you'll constantly be doing open world content with other people ranging from level 1 all the way to level 80 in maxed out legendary equipment. Now, Guild Wars 2 is going to respect your time almost more than any other MMO on the market. This is once again due to that horizontal progression, and the fact that ArenaNet, the game's developers, absolutely refuse to allow any content to become irrelevant. The best weapons and armor in the game on the day it released in 2012 are still viable, and in fact sought after. Let's say I got my best in slot equipment in 2013, and then I quit the game, until yesterday. I would come back to the game and my character would be equally as powerful as he was in 2013. And still able to participate in endgame content immediately. There's almost no other game I can think of where power creep has remained this at bay. And that's because fundamentally, Guild Wars 2 is a little bit less about gear progression in terms of getting better equipment, and it's more about collection. Later on, you're also going to be able to specialize into 3 separate forms of your class, and you can switch between these quite easily, so you'll want a set of gear for each of these 3 separate classes. So don't think that you're going to run out of things to do, it's quite the opposite. You'll never log in and feel less powerful or less advantaged because you didn't get a chance to play. And for this reason, I'm giving Guild Wars 2 a 9.5 out of 10 when it comes to respecting your time. So far, that's the highest rating for any category currently on this list. Now, the fun factor. Guild Wars 2 is interesting because in my opinion, it's really up to you to get out there and have fun. When I first got to the highest level in Guild Wars 2, I was a little confused. There was 3 to 4 expansions I could participate in, as well as plenty of DLC, but I had just done a ton of questing and storyline progression, so I wasn't necessarily looking forward to doing more. However, it's really up to you to go out and find what content you want to participate in, because it's out there, it's available, and it's definitely a ton of fun. So first off, you get a free level 80 character boost anytime you purchase an expansion in Guild Wars 2, meaning if you wanted to participate in that expansion content, you could try it on a brand new class and a brand new level 80. Some of these expansions include massive benefits like access to the mount system, which includes dynamic mounts like the raptor who can jump farther distances or the bunny who can hop super high. Or even later on in further expansions, the Sky Scale, which acts as a flying mount that operates on stamina and velocity. Furthermore, you can get involved in PvP, which includes World vs. World, where you'll pick a team and charge forward into enemy territories, participating in both PvE and PvP to capture new areas. It's honestly some of the most fun I've ever had in Guild Wars 2. And furthermore, holiday events, fractal dungeons, world completion, world bosses, meta events, the list goes on and on of fun things to do in Guild Wars 2. But the caveat, it does require you to search it out for yourself and get involved yourself. So for those reasons, I'm going to be giving Guild Wars 2 a fun factor of 8 out of 10. And monetization. Basically, in Guild Wars 2, you get the base game completely for free. This is a gargantuan amount of content that would take multiple hundreds of hours to complete, in which you get full access to most of the World vs. World, world bosses, tons of dynamic events, but you will miss out on the mount system, some meta events, and tons of story progression and opening of the map even further. In order to unlock these things, they need to be purchased, whether that is the expansions or the DLC. However, some of these can actually be purchased with in-game gold by using the currency exchange system. And furthermore, Guild Wars 2 features a shop. Most of the shop is strictly cosmetic, however, things like inventory and bank space boosters are also there. I got a little backlash on my Guild Wars 2 review for saying that ArenaNet likes to stifle your inventory space in order to sell the boosters, but I stand by that statement. There are a ton of items in Guild Wars 2 that are likely to fill up your inventory very quickly. However, with all that being said, Guild Wars 2 is definitely one of the more tame MMOs when it comes to monetization. So for that reason, it's going to get a 6.5 out of 10. Putting all that together gives Guild Wars 2 the astounding 7.75 out of 10 ranking in terms of new players who are new to the MMO genre. I completely stand by this. Guild Wars 2 is a bit of a sleeper when we take a look at the top 5 MMOs, but it really stands out to me as one of the most well-rounded, fun, and unique experiences on the list. And finally, we have to talk about old school RuneScape, the quintessential second monitor clicker MMO that just never seems to die. But no, seriously, this low graphic number go up machine is one of the best MMOs on the market currently and has been for quite some time. Seriously, the game's population indicates it could be in the top 3 of the most popular MMOs currently. And for good reason. I understand, listen, the graphics can be off-putting if you've never tried RuneScape, but this is an experience you don't want to miss out on, so let's take a look at the categories. First up, as a new player experience, RuneScape might seem a little daunting, though the original game was made in the early 2000s and catered to children. So much of the early game is going to be fairly self-explanatory. Along with the addition of RuneLite and an almost infinite amount of resources, including the old school RuneScape wiki, and literally years worth of YouTube content for you to consume, I don't think OSRS is as daunting of a new player experience as people might think. The reason people probably consider it daunting is that it's much closer to a sandbox experience than you might imagine. You can log in and make a new account and do absolutely whatever you want. You could start questing, leveling up your skills equally, working on some combat, saving up some money to get your first set of gear, or you can lock yourself to a single chunk of the game until you complete every activity that is possible within that chunk, which could potentially take hundreds and in some extreme cases thousands of hours of gameplay. Yes, some people really do that. But the early game of old school RuneScape is often cherished and considered to be one of the best parts of the game by many. And on top of that, the game is also available and plays really well on mobile. So for those reasons, I'm going to give the OSRS new player experience a 7 out of 10. It can be daunting, but it can be so good. Now, in terms of respecting your time, I'm not going to cut any corners here because in old school RuneScape, you definitely can't cut any corners. This game is an absolute grind fest. That's kind of the point. If you want to get any of your 23 skills to level 99, which is the max, be prepared to spend a lot of time grinding this out. The leveling works on a system where every 7 levels, the experience required to get to the next level doubles. This means to get from level 1 to level 2 only requires 83 experience points, but to get to level 99 from 98 requires 1.2 million experience. This is also where you might have heard the infamous 92 is half of 99 meme. Because in RuneScape, at level 92, you are officially halfway to level 99 in terms of experience. Now, in some sense of the word, the game does respect your time because you can log in and out as you please and maintain that progress steadily over the course of potentially years. The game is also extremely AFKable, meaning you can often play while doing something else, even playing another game or doing your homework or watching a movie, whatever it might be. All around, OSRS is one of the grindiest MMOs that currently exists on the market. On the other hand, it does respect the time you put into it. So, for that reason, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10 for this category. And moving on, how can a point-and-click game from the early 2000s still be fun in 2024? Well, just ask any of the 100,000 plus players online. Are you having fun? In fact, the game even asks you this when you log out just to make sure that you actually had fun, which is kind of hilarious. But genuinely, OSRS has plenty of fun things to do, whether that be doing some of the best quests in the genre in terms of complexity and storytelling, or participating in some of the most competitive full-loop PvP that exists on the market. Or you could try out one of the limited time servers known as leagues, which include 10 times experience rates. Or you can just stand around flipping items at the Grand Exchange, which serves as the main trading hub for players across the entire game. There is so much to do in OSRS that when you log on, one of the first things you're going to ask yourself is what you need to prioritize, because there's just too many options of things that you could be working on. For me personally though, the fun of old school RuneScape comes from the unmatched sense of progression that's offered along with their unique leveling system. Almost no other game has ever captured how good it feels to level up your skills quite like old school RuneScape. And for that alone, I could give a 7 out of 10. But including everything else I talked about, we're going to put OSRS at an 8 out of 10 on the fun scale. And last but not least, monetization in old school RuneScape. Basically, the game is free to play, but there is a monthly membership fee which unlocks 90% of the content. So I would consider the free to play version of RuneScape to be more of a trial or a demo than anything else. But secondly, and most notably, OSRS has bonds. This is a currency that's purchased with real life money, but can then be sold in-game for gold. Or it could be used to acquire 14 days of membership. Bonds are the lifeblood of the economy in OSRS, and despite many people's claims, this is definitely pay to win. You can buy items to level your skills, buy armor and equipment, etc. It is a little bit more nuanced than just that, however, as many of the actual best in slot items and weapons are locked behind quests and extremely difficult PvM content. You might be thinking, how difficult can PvM get in a clicker game? Oh boy. But on top of that, OSRS suffers from a massive real-world trading issue, and these bonds serve as a way to combat some of those situations and to prevent players from getting scammed by third-party markets. It definitely still happens, but I'm kind of afraid of just how invasive a third-party market would be in 2024 without the existence of bonds to temper it. With all that being said, I'm going to give OSRS monetization a 5 out of 10 because it still is pay to win, though there's more nuance to it than that. With all that being added up, OSRS is at a 6.6 out of 10 overall as a game people should try if it's their very first MMO. So that means we have our final scores. We have Elder Scrolls Online at 6.25, Old School RuneScape at 6.6, Star Wars The Old Republic at 6.9, nice, and we have Classic WoW scoring a 7.25. And finally, Guild Wars 2 at a very impressive 7.75. Now, let's be honest, these numbers don't really mean anything. This is just an arbitrary scoring system I came up with based loosely on what people said they look for in an MMO. These games that I showed you today are, in my opinion, the strongest candidates if you are new to the genre, and as an awesome starter game, and something you should definitely try, but ultimately, the choice comes down to you. Figure out what you're looking for. What kind of gameplay excites you? What kind of role do you want to play in an online world? And go from there. And don't let the opinions of others sway you too often, especially once you find a game you enjoy. And don't let people tell you that MMOs are a dying genre. I see new players in all of these games literally every day. But anyway, folks, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who made it to the end of the video. Don't forget a like, a comment, a sub. Those things help a bunch. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider becoming a channel member. But I'll catch you all in the next one. Later.